I have to ask you a question about Donald Trump's statement yesterday talking about suspending the Constitution. Your reaction?
Well, when President Trump was in office, I didn't make a habit of speaking out of his tweet du jour. I don't know what came out on whatever his new social platform is, but people were not interested in looking backwards. The people who gave us the majority, and again, we barely won it. We barely eked it out. So let's be straight about where we're at. They gave us an opportunity, and we need to perform, and we need to care about the issues that they care about, which is how do they lower the cost at the pump. I know when I go into Heinen's that the price of everything I buy, eggs, bacon, toast, it all goes up, right? It hasn't gone down. And again, people have to live within a budget. What are we doing to make sure that they fall within that budget? What are we doing to make sure that their lives are better? And how do we continue to make sure that they have the jobs and the economy is stable and they have the jobs to be able to live and take care of their family?
But Donald Trump was your nominee in 2016 and 2020. You voted for him in 2016 and 2020. Now he's talking about suspending the Constitution. Can you support a candidate in 2024 who's for suspending the Constitution?
Well, again, it's early. I think there's going to be a lot of people in the primary. I think at the end of the day, you will say whoever the Republicans end up pick, I'll fall in behind because that's...
Even if it's Donald Trump, as he's called for suspending the Constitution?
Well, again, I think it's going to be a big field. I don't think Donald Trump's going to clear out the field like he did in 16.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, if he's the nominee, will you support him?
I will support whoever the Republican nominee is. And I don't think that at this point he'll be able to get there because I think there's a lot of other good quality candidates out there.
It's a remarkable statement. You'd support a candidate who's come out for suspending the Constitution?
Well, he says a lot of things. You have to take him in context. And right now, I have to worry about making sure as a Republican governance group and a Republican majority that we make things work for American people. And I can't be really chasing every one of these crazy statements that come out from any of these candidates at the moment.
But that's an extraordinary statement. You can't come out against someone who's for suspending the Constitution?
Well, first off, he has no ability to suspend the Constitution. Secondly,
but he says he's for it.
Well, he says a lot of things but that doesn't mean that it's ever going to happen. So you got to accept exact fact from fantasy. And fantasy is that we're going to suspend the Constitution and go backwards. We're moving forward, and we're going to continue to move forward as a Republican majority and as a Republican conference.
Talk about a profile in courage. Tell you what, those men who stormed the beach in Normandy could learn a thing or two about principles and bravery by someone like Republican David Joyce. Here is yet another constitutional conservative who's decided that it's not worth actually defending the Constitution. And Joyce gives a whole raft of excuses. He's asked if he can support a candidate who says that he wants to suspend the Constitution, and he says that it's early and there's still a whole primary to get through, which is not an answer to whether he'd support a candidate who says that he wants to suspend the Constitution. And look, this isn't supposed to be a gotcha question. We're talking about the bare minimum, supporting someone who themselves supports the literal founding documents of this country, the law of the land. Imagine being so feckless that you can't even bring yourself to do that. It's telling, too, that this guy reverts right back to the talking point about the horse race, as if we needed him to pontificate on whether or not Trump would win the primary. Here's the thing. Whether Trump wins the primary depends partially on whether the people in his own party, like David Joyce, actually show some spine and hold him to account. These people have agency. Joyce himself has agency. And yet instead of being, a leader, he shrinks down and just starts playing pundit. I mean, dear God, for people to claim to be leaders, they are absolutely horrified of taking a stand for anything. But then, when inevitably pressed by George Stephanopoulos, Joyce ultimately has nowhere to go and admits that he will support whoever the Republican nominee is, even if that nominee is Donald Trump, who has called for terminating the U.S. Constitution. And that really is the whole ballgame. It really puts into full perspective the extent to which these people don't stand for anything. Like, this is a Republican, a member of the so-called Party of the Constitution, expressing support for the only candidate I know of in modern American history who has called for terminating that very document. Just like how they claim to be the party of family values, only to then line up behind a guy who's paid out God knows how many hush money payouts for affairs. Just like they claim to be for fiscal responsibility, only to then add $7.8 trillion to the national debt when they had unified control of government under Donald Trump. Just like they claim to be pro-police, only to then vote against state and local funding that would aid police departments in the American Rescue Plan. Just like they claim to be for the military, only to then turn around and vote against the PACT Act when it was first up for a vote because they wanted to punish the Democrats Democrats for introducing the Inflation Reduction Act. These things weren't actual values. They were just empty words that the Republican Party hid behind while attempting to market themselves to Americans. And it really is incredible how when faced with even the mildest pushback to those purported values, they fall by the wayside faster than you can blink. I'd also ask this for these Republicans like David Joyce who casually concede that Trump disregarding the Constitution is no big deal. Do you really think that if Barack Obama, for example, had called for terminating the Constitution, that someone like Joyce would brush it off and say, well, he says a lot of stuff, or, don't worry, it's not like he can actually do that? And it really does show the asymmetry between the two parties here. Republicans are out here right now pretending that Hunter Biden is the greatest security threat America's ever contended with, even though he has literally had zero impact on anything. And yet, meanwhile, at the same exact time, we've got the leader of the Republican Party, a former president of the United States on the right, outright calling for the end of American democracy. And these Republican lawmakers know that they can just say, sure, I'd vote for him, and nothing will happen. This is what happens when one party's outright opposition to our own system of government has become so normalized that we wouldn't dare expect them to stand for anything anymore. What's telling too is that after all of this, Joyce pretends that the GOP isn't interested in looking backwards, that his party is focused on making sure that the cost of gas and food goes down. Except I'm not sure he's actually had a chance to listen to his own party since they've taken the majority in the House, because their priority doesn't seem to include lowering prices at all, and instead focuses on stuff like this.
How about when Hunter Biden sent the email that Mr. Comer pointed to? Sent the email asking for keys to his new office space, one for himself, one for President Biden, one for his uncle Jim Biden, and one for the emissary for the chairman of the Chinese energy company CFCC.
Behind Glenn and Andrew is a map from Hunter's laptop. This was a PowerPoint presentation on his laptop in Chinese.
But what's interesting is a different whistleblower, one who didn't come to our office, a different whistleblower who went to Senator Grassley's office, said that Mr. Thibault, by the way, the head of the special agent in charge at the Washington field office, Mr. Thibault is also the guy who suppressed information about the Hunter Biden story in October of 2020. I'd like to talk to Mr. Thibault. In fact, we have asked to talk to Mr. Thibault.
If we can keep it about Hunter Biden, this is kind of a big deal, we think. If we can keep it about Hunter Biden, that would be great.
We had 5 million people cross our border illegally since Joe Biden took office. And let's compare that to how many Russians have invaded Ukraine. 82,000 Russians have invaded Ukraine. I think the American people and the taxpayers of this country deserve to know why the Biden administration and this Congress is so interested in funding the protection of Ukraine's border and not the protection of our border. That's a very good question.
I think that's a question. I think that's a question for Kevin McCarthy. That we're focused on a lot of investigations now. I've been very transparent with the media on it. That wasn't one of them.
How often are they talking to the FBI? Are they talking to the FBI? Who's doing the talking? Who's doing the briefing? Were they briefed? There's so many questions that need answered so we can get to the bottom of this.
So I'm not sure how investigating Hunter Biden is going to lower the cost of gas, but I guess only someone with the brain power of Jim Jordan or Marjorie Taylor Greene is able to tell us that. So good on George Stephanopoulos on holding David Joyce's feet to the fire, but I hope that everyone watching right now recognizes the ease with which this guy is willing to affirm his support for Donald Trump, even despite saying outright that he wants our very founding document suspended so that he can consolidate power for himself. In case there was any doubt about the extent to which the GOP was and remains a cult of personality, this should put those doubts to rest. These people stand for nothing. They are not here to help their constituents. They exist solely to serve Donald Trump. And there is quite literally nothing that he could say that would ever make them find a spine and utter even a single ill word of him. But remember, these midterm elections were a referendum on the extremism of the GOP, and Republicans have responded to those disastrous results by doubling and tripling down on the extremism. They have learned nothing, and they've decided instead to continue their sprint off the cliff to the right. And if they want to entrench themselves in that losing strategy, then I'll make sure that you see it every single time they show you who they are. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.